Right, I've got it recording.
We can see when upon looking at the free market is that the whole purpose of economic and society protections is when we look at the fact of licensure, we can see that the whole intent is for people to look at protecting the consumer. However, but whenever we go down to the streets of Washington, D.C., we never see that it's actually the consumer lobbying for protection, but it is really just the physicians. For a key example, what we see is a key part of limiting creating barriers to entry, to limiting the amount of firms into business. We can see that the American Medical Association got in trouble in the 1930s during the Nazi regime, when they were starting to drive physicians out of Europe. A large mass immigrated to the United States. However, the American Medical Association at that time added new strengths and regulations that prohibited this giant influx of people entering the system. Now, what was occurring at the time is the government was setting up HMOs. When they were setting up these HMOs, they were establishing different sets of medical centers, in which these medical centers would essentially go and create different types of medical cares, much like we see different sorts of FEMA and other groups today. However, the American Association told all of their physicians to not go and not do any part of this, creating a new type of epidemic which drove a lot of people out. We can see that upon using these medical licensings, we can actually see that this ends up rising the demand curve, and shoots it upward, or shoots it right-wise, to the fact that there's a new perceived cost of quality service. But however, the key point of the quality service is we can see, due to new data from the National Physicians Database, that we can see that there is an estimation between 200,000 and 400,000 deaths due to malpractice a year. However, the question then becomes, why is this happening? We can see when we look at the statistics, we can see that actually 5.76% of these only comes from a certain, accounts for almost half of these casualties. The question then becomes, what are these people being held accountable for? The simple answer is that there isn't a lot of physicians actually being held accountable for their actions. The question then becomes simply, why? And it's a lot of different, and you see people like this are actually being held in the system while having other people held out, while the American Medical Association and other medical standards are limiting places to work. You can go to school to get certain degrees, and they are limiting amongst other things. We can look at a key example of one who never actually had a medical licensure. We could look at the example of Vivian Thomas, who had no degree, no education whatsoever, and he established the cure to what was known as the blue baby syndrome. We can see that there's going to be quite a bit of others. Now, a lot of the people go through and ask, what is exactly the key, the issue going against us? And the answer is fear. A lot of people think that as soon as this happens, the market will be flooded with a firm of quackeries, and we would see a substantial increase in malpractice. However, this is false, because we'll still see that other federal regulations will stay in place from the FDA and other things. Just because that licensing will be lifted does not mean you'll see people like Ed Gein go out and attempt to become a doctor. No, we'll see that this can't be happening at all. Instead, this will start to drive prices down as people look for new innovative ways to save and cut costs, as this will rise to a war of marginal costs, of which people will attempt to fight and consume to get the lowest amount of cost. Other firms will start to be driven out of the market. We can see that before. There have been other firms in the United States before medical licensing, in which groups like the Firms Lines and the Elk Woods that will essentially go and group together these doctors and to ensure that they did not create malpractice. Upon this, we will see that there's an essential fact that we can see that the limitation will eventually proceed to drive people out of the market. We'd see a new equilibrium of which we'll see cheaper and more affordable healthcare, which is a key alternative to a great deal of a lot of different other sets and different regulations the federal government is making. And with that, I now open myself up to cross-examination, yield the rest of my time to the floor.
Okay, I've got 3 minutes starting now.
No questions for Lannan.
Okay.
I'll take the 3 minutes to think about what I'm going to say.
So I guess he starts Brett.
Alright, so when do I start my argument? Do I just...
Okay, so you have a 5-minute speech, and then just let me know when you're starting, and I'll start the timer.
Alright, I'll start right now. So my opponent said some stuff about the free market and some other stuff about cheaper, more affordable healthcare. All of it is pretty much bullshit, and here's why. Medical licensure ensures that the public is protected from problematic, unqualified, incompetent physicians. And Lannan actually makes my case for me. He pretty much cites this statistic about 200 to 400,000 deaths each year due to malpractice. And that tells you that there is a problem in the medical profession, a problem of incompetence. And Lannan is suggesting that given this problem, we should let more incompetent doctors into the field. Somehow that's supposed to solve the problem he identified of 200 to 400,000 deaths each year due to malpractice. That makes no sense. Licensure, on the other hand, makes sense. What licensure does is it keeps out unqualified doctors, protects the public from unqualified doctors and from the spread of diseases that go untreated from failed treatment, failed doctors. Licensure, in the long term, he says some economic things I didn't really understand, but in the long term, it's going to save people money by preventing incompetent doctors from fleecing patients, from failing to treat them, and even worse, from committing malpractice and affirmatively hurting them. The other problem with the idea of letting in all these supposedly cheaper, more affordable doctors and physicians who aren't going to be qualified because they're not licensed and there's no system in place to ensure that they actually know what they're doing, is you're going to have a massive decrease in public trust for the healthcare profession. And that's a huge problem because trust is absolutely essential to effective treatment. So that's all I got.
Okay, stopping the
I don't know how
timer.
much time I have. I lost track.
You had 2:36 left.
Okay, maybe I'll keep, I don't know, whatever. I'll just leave it there.
Okay.
Do you have the timer ready for cross-examination, Tough?
1 second. Okay, yeah, it's ready now.
Alright, for the first question I have for you is that you stated in your round that the whole purpose of medical licensure was to ensure the protection of the consumer. However, how is the medical licensure the protection of the consumer where the death toll from malpractice is just so ridiculously high?
It's ridiculously high, but the point is that it would be even higher if there weren't some sort of barrier to entry preventing unqualified, incompetent physicians from actually practicing.
But, however, if it's to prevent these incompetent physicians from entering, then why is 5.76% of these physicians is accountable for well over half of the malpractice costs? And yet they're still in the field and haven't gone prosecuted. Only 7.6% of those people have actually been prosecuted and found guilty.
Prosecution and disciplining of the physicians is totally irrelevant to the issue of whether we have licensing at the front end. So first I would say that's a completely irrelevant issue. Secondly, I would say that that in the absence of licensure requirements, that malpractice number would be even higher. There would be even more deaths, more injuries, more affirmatively hurt patients, more failures to treat patients, more spread of disease. So on a broad level, on average, I would say there would be a huge negative impact from removing licensure requirements.
No further questions. I'll take prep time beginning now.
How much prep time do we get?
We each have 5 minutes. We stayed that a while back up.
Okay. Starting now.
Okay. End prep. Let me get a timer ready here real
You've
quick.
got 4 minutes, 10 seconds left.
Alright. Is everyone ready?
Yeah.
Alright. Let me begin. Alright, to fully address my opponent's case, we first have to actually look that my opponent didn't actually have an opening case, so we can actually go and look at. Now keep that in mind when we go to the end of this debate. We can see that my opponent hasn't had an opening case, so no matter what, we can see that it's already more preferable to prefer my case in that point of view. First, nextly, moving on, we can actually see that a lot of the issues my opponent brings up, certain trust issues and other stuff in the long run, we can look at this as actually accountable due to the short-sightedness effect, where people tend to focus more on any type of short-term goals versus long-term. As I brought up in my last round, my opponent has completely dropped. We can see that doing so will launch a new speed of innovation for people in order to fight for a lower marginal cost. When there's a lower marginal cost, we'll see that we'll start to drive people who cannot provide at such a low marginal cost, and the operational cost will be driven out of the market. So we'll see that as soon as prices will begin to plummet, they'll begin to rise once again to a new equilibrium where you can see stable prices on the market. My opponent also managed to bring up, and this was simply incorrect, about there's massively going to be disease and this other type of dystopia, but he fails to realize there's still other government regulations in place, from the FDA, fraudulent rules, and other types of government regulations that stay in place to the point where a lot of this, including the CDC, will keep a lot of this in check, so we'll see that a lot of this stuff will not happen. My opponent also brings up the case about the whole death total and malpractice and how this is bad. However, we can see that a key thing is actually that licensure restricts information. According to Hayek, as he stated in his book The Road to Serfdom, we can see that due to the restriction of medical license or of licensures restriction on information, people will not be able to make a fully sound decisions on their doctors. And when there is the removal of licensures, there will be more information available and abundant, and people will be able to make more sound decisions. Upon these sound decisions, they'll be fully able to find out which doctors aren't the best to go to, and much. We can also see that upon doing so, that a lot of the those who are poor are able to go and shoot for the less qualified doctors. But however, remember that not all doctors won't be as bad as my opponent is saying, simply because, as I brought up before, during the golden age, before medical licensure, we still had groups such as the Elkswoods and the Lions Club that essentially guaranteed and saved doctors and ensured that the only doctors that were essentially able to, or that they had go into the field, were able to actually work confidently and were able to perform up to government standards. And with that, I'll yield the rest of my time to the floor.
Give me like 30 seconds to prep something.
Okay, you have up to 5 minutes of prep time, just letting you know.
Alright, I'm ready.
Okay, you have 4 minutes and 10 seconds left of prep time.
I'm ready to do my. Okay, cool. So when does it actually start now?
Yeah, you have a 3-minute argument whenever you are ready.
Okay, so Lannan says I didn't have a case. That is untrue. I argued specifically that licensure requirements will protect the health of patients, they'll help protect public health by preventing the spread of disease, and it'll decrease the cost of medicine on a large scale because patients will not receive failed treatment, and so they're going to save on that. In terms of Lannan's strange rebuttal about science and advancing the goals of science, that makes no sense because you have practitioners entering the market without any knowledge of medicine. They're not going to actually contribute anything. The way that you advance the goals of science is by making sure that physicians enter the market with sufficient knowledge, with competence, and they actually are kept abreast of all the developments in the field, and that there are requirements for them to continue their education and continue contributing to the field. In terms of restricting information, I don't know what that was about, so I'm just going to ignore it. In terms of the history of the free market regime compared with regulation and licensure requirements, my understanding of the history is that we tried a free market regime, results were disastrous, and that's why we created the AMA and why we have today's medical licensure requirements in the first place. In terms of what Lannan is suggesting, he's suggesting that we have this huge, insanely high rate of medical malpractice, and that the way to solve that is by letting more doctors, incompetent doctors, into the field, into practice. That makes no sense. We remove medical licensure standards, the only thing that's going to happen is a bunch of incompetent doctors will flood the market. The obvious result is that we'll have higher medical malpractice rates. So that makes his proposed solution makes no sense. It's only going to make the problem even worse. Finally, I want to note that Lannan completely drops my point about public trust. There's a huge harm that comes from public distrust of the medical profession. The reason for that is because physicians need the trust of their patients to provide effective medical treatment. And without public trust in the medical profession, a lot of vulnerable patients won't even seek care in the first place. They're not going to be able to have effective treatment when they go to their doctor. They won't trust them. They won't put faith in what their doctors tell them. And the result is going to be ultimately less professional efficacy. So we need medical licenses to make sure patients are protected from quackery, from shitty doctors, and to make sure that there's confidence in the profession to incentivize patients to seek treatment in the first place. That's all.
Okay, that is the last round of the debate. Great job, guys.
Wait, I thought we still had one more.
Another round.
Is
So
there?
basically, four-round debate is what my understanding was.
Oh, okay, yeah, I saw you posted another couple. Sorry about that.
Okay, I was going to say, well, according to my flow sheet when I wrote it down, I thought I had that. Anyways, I will not need time for prep. Alright, so, are we ready?
Yes, resetting now.
Let me get my timer reset. Alright. Alright, so the first thing we can actually see is my opponent is repetitively, he's stating that I dropped his trust argument. However, that is not as true, as I have actually been arguing about this the entire time through the short-sightedness effect. We can see that the importance of this is completely excruciatingly large, as this also ties into my Hayek information in argument. Essentially, we are currently, information is restricted on a free market, so we don't actually are unavailable and unknowingly to know what doctor to trust and what doctor to go to due to the restriction of information due to licensure. And then, in order for actually us to set this free, is we can simply abolish medical licensure, and we'll see information will become more abundant, more available, and people will be able to actually research more in depth into who they're choosing, and which the statement will get is that you'll get the you'll get the quality you can pay for. And then my opponent is repetitively bringing up this just dystopian scenario where disease runs rampant. However, he is repetitively misunderstanding and misregarding the simple facts that we still have people from the rules and regulations from the CDC and FDA where all of this is regulated and such. And simple malpractice people will actually get be able to become cracked down even more. And that's the whole reason I brought this up in the first place in my opening contentions. We can see that this is highly important, as we can actually see the malpractice will decrease due to these people being able to be run out of the market due to the new influx. My opponent is also completely dropping due to the whole effect, as I brought up with the marginal cost. This is a key voting issue because we can see that this is running all the incompetent doctors out of the market. Though it'll be for free, we'll see more innovation occur due to people wanting to cut down and decrease marginal costs as much as possible, which we'll see people just like Vivian Thomas, as I brought up in my first round, who ended up creating the cure to the blue baby syndrome. And we can see stuff like that occur, which more people will be able to fully create new ways to cure and new different things. As he was the person that helped disprove the whole, well, do not touch the heart, and now we have open heart surgery and more. And continuing, we can also repetitively see, my opponent also brings up the AMA, but we do have to realize that was also a private organization that was created in the 1840s. It wasn't actually become a state-granted monopoly yet until the early 1900s. So yeah, we can actually see that you'd be voting for my on my case today simply due to the fact that we'd be receiving better quality in the long run due to the undercuts of marginal costs, and the whole fact is that the short-sightedness effect and the increasement of information abundance due to abolishing medical licensure will increase the quality and people available to achieve it. And with that, I thank you and urge you to vote pro.
Alright, you still have 4 minutes and 10 seconds of prep time if you'd like to use it, Adam.
I'll use it. Alright, so how much time do I have for this last round?
You should have 3 minutes. Sorry about that.
Okay. So I'll start right now.
Okay.
Alright, so first, Lannan's information argument. The restriction of information has nothing to do with medical licensure, so all I can say to that is that is totally relevant to the debate. Also, in terms of information, assuming that we take away medical licensure, the problem is that there's a lot of vulnerable people, especially poorer groups who don't have the kind of education that, let's say, everyone in this hangout has, and they're not going to have access to that information. They're not going to know where to find it, and in the absence of licensure, they're the ones who are most vulnerable and most likely to be harmed. In terms of FDA regulations, I don't know what those have to do with having licensure requirements, having some sort of basic protection on the front end before you can even practice. And I also don't think FDA regulations have anything to do with the practice of medicine in the first place. That's mostly about pharmaceuticals and drugs. In terms of marginal costs, I don't know much. I don't think that's really that big of an impact or really relevant to this debate much, since it's, let's say you have a marginal decrease in the price of doctors and more people can afford it, but that's pretty much irrelevant with the Affordable Care Act that we have. And you're going to have people who are being affirmatively harmed by these incompetent doctors, and I think that would completely outweigh any negligible marginal costs you save or whatever. And let's see, what else did I say? The AMA, that was created, I don't know, whenever Lannan said, I don't know the details, but it was monopolized, as he said, as a result of mass problems with medical care. The standards were extremely low. Incompetent physicians who had no idea what they were doing were treating patients and harming them. And I'll just close by emphasizing that Lannan, at the start of this debate, said the problem is we have medical malpractice, a huge rate of medical malpractice. We have 200 to 400,000 people dying every year from medical malpractice. And the solution he proposes makes no sense, because what you're going to have is more incompetent doctors on the market. That means more medical malpractice, more people being harmed. And given the high rates that we already have with licensure standards, I don't see how it makes any sense to get rid of them. That's all.
All right, so now that's the end of the debate. Sorry for the preemptive earlier one.
No, you're fine.
So would you guys prefer to have open voting in a debate round, or would you guys rather have the audience in the chat give you an RFD?
Nathan, RFD.
Yeah, I'd be down to have this audience, but I don't really, whatever.
Okay, so to make it fair, we should probably get at least 3 people to give a verbal RFD on this.
I'll just go on ahead and say that because I didn't hear the entire debate, I'm not going to vote.
Okay.
I may give feedback at some point, but and that I didn't hear the whole thing. It would be inappropriate of me to cast a ballot. I certainly have thoughts on what I heard, though.
Okay.
Sorry, Adam, the whole policy speak thing is I have a lot of information I have to get out in such a short period of time. Marginal costs